Okay, right now, what I'm about to say, you might say, is complete nuts, completely wrong, impossible. But we're going to debate with the doctor in a moment. Breakfast is not the most important meal of the day. Fact period. We all got it wrong. Marketing blurb. More money spent on advertising for cereals than almost any other food category. It's not the most important meal of the day. Maybe for children when they're growing. We'll talk to a doctor in a moment about that. But as we get older, do we need breakfast? I'm one of the many, many millions of people now that are called an OMAD, which is a one meal a day, and I only basically eat one meal a day in the evening with my family. And that extended period of fasting, many doctors believe, is super, super healthy and consistent with evolution. But putting all that on one side, because until you stop eating all the carbs and cut down the sugars, it's almost impossible to skip breakfast because you crave it the second you wake up. In fact, you crave it so much they even came up with a cereal called Crave, because they were brainwashing us into anyway, let's get off that rocking horse or that pedestal straight away. You don't have to have breakfast, but if you do want breakfast because you're currently still eating foods that make you want to have breakfast, you're waking up with that need for food and energy straight away, what would be the best breakfast to have if you're trying to lose weight or if you're diabetic and you're trying to control your sugar levels? I'll tell you quickly what used to happen in my house with the children. I've got 7 children. As they all grew up, trying to be great parents. Apple juice, because of course that's a fruit and must be good for you. Brown bread on toast, because that must be good for you. And probably a banana as well. And well, we're about to find out whether that was a sensible choice as a parent. Right, panel. First of all, we have a panel this morning. Thank you for joining us. We've got a panel from all over the world, which is great. It's far-flung as Hong Kong. And my fantastic father, who's down there with his headsets on, looking like he's about to just become an airline pilot. Dad, you look great, mate. Yeah, he's with us. He's there. He's still with fantastic. Dad is diabetic type 2, and we're trying to help Dad as well reverse his diabetes. Let's start with cornflakes, invented by Kellogg's over 100 years ago, stable for many, many families. We tend to put extra sugar on it. We tend to put milk on it. But before we put the sugar on, what does a tiny, in my mind, little 30-gram portion? I can tell you right now that my son Tom, that had this before I knew about the sugars lurking in carbs, would have around 2.5 times this every day. He would have around 80 grams in his serving, but the suggested size is 30 grams, so stick with this. Panel, you're getting used to the format now. On a piece of paper, write down the effect you think a tiny little 30 grams of cornflakes would have on your blood sugar levels. And what the panel, if you're just joining us for the first time, what they're writing down is how many teaspoons or cubes, because a teaspoon and a cube have about 5 grams, how many teaspoons or cubes of sugar do you think our cornflakes turn into? Right, on this one, we've got a big, big whiteboard, and it's going to tell us the answer. So a 30-gram serving of cornflakes is going to turn into, if our technology is there, quite a lot. In fact, that is not the correct answer there at the moment, but I'll explain what that answer is right now for you. A bowl of cornflakes turns into around 8 teaspoons of sugar, 8 cubes. But what the page there is correctly showing is, because I've got my son's name on there, Tom, that's the equivalent that my son was having on a daily basis. Literally 5 days a week, he was having that amount of sugar before he went to school, because he had that super big portion of cornflakes. So before you even go adding the sugar, the cereal that has so many health benefits written on the outside, and by the way, we could have picked on so many cereals. They are slightly different, but all in the same area. Porridge turns into a lot of sugar. Frosties, Cocoa Pops, virtually anything that comes in a packet that's based on carbohydrates, wheat and grain, even your mueslis, will turn into sugar. Let's bring on Dr. David Unwin, who's an expert in this area, who has worked with his brilliant team in Southport to create a guide for us all on Spoonful of Sugar, so much so that NICE, which is a body that, well, David can tell us about NICE, endorsed his charts, and now many, many doctors are using them. David, tell us about the cereals and the grains and the breakfast that we've been feeding our kids for so many years. And also, one question, David, did you make the same mistake as I did with your children before you understood all this?
I absolutely did. I really did. They were having, I thought it was healthy that they would be having litres of fresh orange juice. The more, the better, I thought. And we bought specially big bowls because they wanted to have enormous bowls of cereal. So a bit like your Tom. We bought triple sized bowls so they could have so much. And of course, I was in for such a shock when I did the calculations, and cornflakes really, really surprised me. Tiny portion, equivalent to 8 teaspoons of sugar. And I think one of my worries with children, well, and adults as well, we're beginning, if you think about your day, where you start with cornflakes and then you have bread and then you might have a biscuit and so on, we're having sugar with our sugar with our sugar. And I think a lot of young people, particularly, are not getting enough protein. Of course, there's hardly any protein in breakfast cereal. So I now believe we could do far better than that bowl of cornflakes for breakfast.
Yeah, and of course, then the days, and the panel already know this because we had it in another show that we had, and then the days when they weren't having cornflakes, we were having the toasts, and we know that 2 slices of bread, even if they're brown bread, we're talking about the equivalent effect on the blood glucose level in 2 pieces of brown bread or white bread of around 6 teaspoons of sugar, and we know the blood, our 5 litres of blood only wants to suspend around 1 teaspoon of sugar. So we were just adding sugar on sugar on sugar. And I tell you what, David, the other day drove me nuts. My mum, big churchgoer, been brought up around the church. There was an advert for these things, Weetabix, where the advert on the radio was talking to Noah about his ark. And they were talking to Noah about his ark, and I don't know if it was God that was saying it, but somebody was saying to Noah, "How did you make my ark in one day?" And Noah turned around and said, "Because I had 3 shredded Weetabix." And it drove me absolutely mad because we did the calculation on 3 shredded wheats, and it's the equivalent of around 10 teaspoons of sugar. So something that's advertised and marketed to us as super, super healthy has the same effect on our blood glucose level of 10 teaspoons of sugar. So if we want to avoid the cereals, David, and we want to avoid the Weetabix, especially 3 of them, and the orange juices and the apple juices, where should we be steering our family if we still want a breakfast?
Well, Steve, I can see on your table in front of you there an egg.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know, eggs, it's difficult to beat eggs. Pretty well a perfect food. I mean, there's everything in that egg to produce a young chick, isn't there? So there's calcium for its bones, there's enough protein, there's everything you need. And when I was young, we used to be told to go to work on an egg. I would go to work on about 3 eggs, probably, because, an egg really is hardly going to put up your blood sugar at all. So you're having all the benefit of the protein, and there's fat-soluble vitamins in that egg and other things, without the downside of the sugar that somebody with diabetes struggles to metabolize. So go for the egg, but have 2 or maybe 3.
And do we have to worry? I mean, a lot of doctors, certainly those more old school, would say, "Oh, but don't have too many. You've got to watch your cholesterol level." Is that something we need to obsess about with the eggs or not?
Well, do you know, this has happened quietly without any of us noticing, but about 6 years ago, they realized there was no link between dietary cholesterol and blood cholesterol. So the things you eat that may have high cholesterol, and eggs do have cholesterol in, does not link to an increase in the cholesterol in your blood. So there's very little link between dietary cholesterol and blood cholesterol. And I've been measuring hundreds of my patients, and on the whole, when they cut the sugar and the starchy carbs, their cholesterol and their lipid profiles improve significantly, and they're eating a lot of eggs. So please don't worry about your egg.
So if we want a breakfast, we could, as long as we're making sure that bacon's not being overly produced and overly then enhanced, it's regular bacon, bacon and eggs, or salmon and avocado, which seems to be the yuppie way of doing it at the moment. Kind of say actually like that as well. Or strawberries and cream. All these things, once we learn what we can have, we can still have a breakfast, but try and avoid the breads, the grains, the Weetabix, anything that comes from the corn, and anything that elevates the blood sugar level. And I didn't bring you onto the program at the very, very beginning there, David. I was saying, we were told you mustn't skip breakfast. Now you've been, GP for as many years as you have, and specialising in diabetes. Am I wrong to give that advice, that for many people, skipping breakfast isn't the worst thing in the world?
Well, I used to think that, breakfast was the most important meal of the day because my mother said that was true. But if you look into people with type 2 diabetes, of which I am one, there's a thing called the dawn phenomenon, which is people with diabetes tend to start the day with a high blood sugar. So really, if your blood sugar is already high in the morning, and if you're not particularly hungry, why on earth would you eat an extra unnecessary meal? And I stopped eating breakfast probably about 5 years ago now. And I found I really didn't need it. And in fact, it gives me a bit more time in the day. So a bit like you, I'm eating in a restricted window because every meal you eat tends to stimulate some insulin and some weight gain too. So that I would actually eat like you in a restricted window, and I wouldn't particularly have breakfast because I know my own blood sugar starts the day a little high. So why increase it by anything? And also, I'm not really that hungry first thing.
Absolutely. Look, we're fascinated, David, speaking to you. Panel, you've been brilliant today. For those that have missed the earlier programs, we covered some fruit and veg in our first program in this mini-series. Then we went and looked at the pastas and the rices, and then we've just all looked at breakfast together. I hope you got as much out of it, audience, as we got out of it. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you don't mind if we call on you again at some stage. Thank you very much. Let's have a wave so everybody knows you're still there. Yeah, you're still there. God bless you all. That's right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, audience. What a great, great show. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something from that. Remember, it's not always common sense where that sugar is hiding. So do have a look at our app. Make sure if you're on our Reverse Your Type 2 Diabetes program, you look in your journal because in there we have the glycemic index. Either of those, the app or our journal, they're going to help you discover where that sugar is hiding.